Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy are a comic book dynamic that have developed like no other. The relationship at its core is a story of healing. Despite one being a mallet-wielding sociopathic killer and the other a metahuman eco-terrorist, their developing bond over the course of 28 years has connected with fans vigorously. For what started as a mere robbery-clash encounter has now branched out to multiple mediums and continues to grow in popularity, being partnered together in memorabilia, games, animated shows, films, and continuously being pushed by Margot Robbie for the big screen.
Me personally, I'd love to do a Poison Ivy film because I love in the comics the Harley Poison Ivy relationship. Some comics it's romantic, some comics it's just friendship. Either way, I'm fascinated by that, and I love seeing them together in the comics.
The relationship has progressed from being bosom buddies, partners in crime to gal pals and more, but it's been a slow development. Decades of a frustrating slow burn tale of will they won't they from DC Comics. Within the last 5 years alone, a multitude of comics have worked to solidify Harley and Ivy's romantic feelings for another as canon, both outside of DC's main storylines and even within. They've become a recognisable leading face within the LGBT rota of characters in DC Comics. It's an endeavour long overdue, but a welcoming one, that nonetheless feels organic regarding the future of Harley and Ivy's stories. Which is why HBO Max's neoteric Harley Quinn animated series doesn't feel contrived nor artificial in their romantic depiction of Harley and Ivy's relationship. Since the foundation of their disorderly encounter, the seeds had been planted all along, and Patrick Schumacher, an executive producer and writer on the Harley Quinn animated series, wholeheartedly agrees.
And I hesitate to even say unprecedented, because clearly we were inspired by what had been done in the comics, prior to the show's existence and all that. And there's always been, this feeling of even from the Harley and Ivy episode of Batman the Animated Series, you could make the argument that there was some, sexual tension between the two of those characters.
Absolutely.
So it's been there for 26 years or whatever it is now.
So how did a dynamic between Harley, who was once a mere sidekick continuously synonymous with the Joker, and Poison Ivy, who ranks as one of Gotham's most closed-off yet powerful villains, become such a well-loved couple, to the point of being recognised or liked even by characters within the Bat family and Gotham rogues alike?
I had a feeling the tension was palpable.
A romantic couple that would ensue a consequential shift in DC Comics' history. Not to disvalue the importance of LGBT romances previously explored, Harley and Ivy as characters individually are far more known within mainstream media and towards regular audiences, being two of the most iconic female villains recognised in comic book history. Their relationship in particular is a leading sapphic romance that has become as iconically recognised as its protagonist counterparts. With the likes of Clark Kent and Lois Lane, or even Batman and Catwoman, Harley and Ivy have become a staple duo with an abundance of adoring fans. Quite often, comic book characters have always been shown to change over time. Inevitable given the hundreds of creators who claim a hero or villain for their own story and interpretation. And with characters that predate over 20 years, changes are bound to have happened. Logos adapt with every new film or story arc, newer companions swapping out the old, morals and personalities slightly changing, and most notably, the costume appearances frequently varying. Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy are no different. Since their debuts, both characters have changed quite predominantly, and yet the foundation of their relationship in modern comics doesn't feel like a drastic departure from its provenance. If anything, the establishment of their brewing partnership led to more narrative growth that expanded on their psyche and character interactions. Of the two, Ivy's character is the oldest, predating to the year 1966 in the comic Batman 181, written by Robert Kanigher and drawn by Sheldon Moldoff. Since the introduction of her character to the early 90s, Poison Ivy is a character often infatuated with Batman. It almost feels oxymoronic to say, given the modern takes that depict their relationship as anything but the conventional hero versus villain. There are still rare moments between them that showcase Batman's acknowledgement of her high intelligence and connection to the Green. However, in comparison to the seductress archetype that once consumed most of her personality and drive, modern Ivy is given more complexities segregated from just her gorgeous looks. Her kiss of death, which was once her deadliest weapon prepped and applied through a hypnotic lipstick, has since adapted deadlier terms. Ivy's powers are now depicted as a natural force of horror, biochemical toxins running through her veins whilst being deadly to the touch of whomever she decides. In fact, it wasn't until much later after her debut, once her popularity grew and the potential for a powerful female supervillain was recognised, that she was finally given an origin story, receiving some character depth that didn't depend upon the Dark Knight. As expected for a woman who was forced into the embodiment of toxicity, her origin story is terrifyingly bleak, perhaps deemed just as tragic as Harley's trajectory, as both women suffered at the hands of men, quite literally. Ivy's father has often shown abusive measures in harrowing her childhood of nightmares, of abusing and killing her mother to complete neglect and care for his daughter. But perhaps the most predominant reasoning for Ivy's sheltered, closed-off life is Dr. Jason Woodrue, a man who preyed upon an innocent teenage Ivy, lied to her, took advantage, drugged, abused, to forcibly experimenting and changing Pamela Isley to the very character we all know, Poison Ivy. Harley's origin, or the most commonly recognised origin due to mainstream coverage, surrounds Dr. Harleen Quinzel breaking the Joker out of Arkham and falling into a vat of chemical solution to prove devotion and obsessive love, thus creating Harley Quinn. The lingering effects of this origin, however, are the repercussions of falling in love with the Clown Prince of Gotham, a man who abuses Harley physically and mentally time and time again. It's a codependent relationship, Harley forming an unhealthy attachment for a man who seeks nothing but ruin for Gotham and the attention of the Bat. Harley and the Joker's dynamic is representation of an abusive relationship, Harley being victim to the effects of traumatic bonding, forgiving the Joker for every misdeed, every injury, every belittlement, and even attempted murder. It would, however, be hypocritical to stay silent of the one problematic element surrounding the beginning of Harley and Ivy's relationship. Whilst Ivy's treatment towards Harley is nowhere comparable nor as grotesque as the Joker's abuse, parts of their starting partnership definitely suffered at the hands of attempted slapstick comedy, a technique predominantly used in cartoons due to animation exaggerating motion to amplify physical comedy. These comics would occur during the late 90s, after Warner Brothers had decades of success through slapstick comedy thanks to the likes of Tom and Jerry and the Looney Tunes. It's an element to Harley and Ivy's dynamic that would never see the light of day again, as it's never been depicted as such in other comics, staying simply within the writings of Paul Dini's run of the characters during the 90s, which was a slightly goofier take on the Gotham Rogues. This highly contrasts to the Joker's continuous abusive nature, which stays consistent throughout most of Harley's stories, through a plethora of different writers that is very much deeply integrated into the DC Comics lore. Despite the slapstick element of the relationship, it was Paul Dini's script work in Batman the Animated Series episode 47 that proposed an unprecedented question Harley hadn't been asked before, that in turn would have a knock-on effect for years to come.
You'd think after living with Mr. J, I'd be used to a little pain.
Why do you put up with that clown?
It's a theme that would recur repetitively throughout Harley and Ivy's relationship, Ivy warning Harley of the Joker's abusive ways just as many times as she would crawl back to him. It makes sense that Ivy would be the first voice of reason in trying to remind and convince Harley to leave the Joker. Ivy experienced the suffering at the hands of men herself, knows what it's like to be mistreated and manipulated. It's the main cause for her hatred of humanity, devoting time to plants rather than the species that exploited her. And yet, Harley's the one human exception for Ivy, perhaps seeing elements of her younger self mirrored in the manipulated, devoted eyes of Harley Quinn. A quaint moment that becomes the first crack in Ivy's emotional shield, something she identifies as a weakness, opposing the one rule she'd set for herself, to never care for another human. Yet, she still accepts Harley into her life, hence the constant need to warn her continuously. She grows fond of Harley, which explains the deep hatred Ivy feels towards the Joker, so infuriated by his abusive actions that Ivy is found threatening the Joker on more than one occasion. Realistically, Ivy could kill the Joker within seconds, a grim fact recognised by the Joker himself. But Ivy refrains from ever doing so, knowing the mere act of hurting Puddin would devastate Harley and potentially lead to an adverse mental deterioration. leading Ivy to do the next best thing in giving Harley immunity to all toxins and poisons. That decision was a pivotal moment in their relationship, but also character disposition. Giving Harley toxic immunity was a form of defense that she lacked before, and in some cases, even giving her slight powers through extra agility and strength. Disturbingly, this boost in abilities could explain how Harley is able to sustain heavy injuries from the Joker that would have killed any regular person. Whilst the idea of giving Harley immunity in Batman the Animated Series was merely a narrative device allowing the ladies to commit crime together, it did coincidentally showcase the first signs of affection and care from Poison Ivy, giving Harley an immunity shot to keep her company around, and of course, to save any toxic fumes from killing her. It was this initial act of kindness that would, in effect, give its own affectionate benefits in the future. Consequent to their first meeting, the charismatic duo titled as the Queens of Crime was finally born, and this pair would continue to flourish through hundreds of appearances together. They're a blast to read and watch, fans continuously delighted with every mention of them teaming up. The Harlivy duo has seen a constant demand for more. There's a fascination in watching them take on heists together and repetitively finding trouble. Both their powers and personalities make for a contrasting synergy just as thrilling as any superhero and their sidekick. They were something different for comic consumers to read, two iconically known villains bestowing chaos in their wake whilst having each other's backs. A welcoming development from Ivy's solo appearances that were becoming rarer as times went on, in addition to seeing Harley separate from the Joker and having more individuality. Stephanie Phillips, the current writer of the ongoing Harley Quinn comic series, expressed outright the same feelings in regards to the popular DC couple. Both Harley and Ivy are strong and literally deadly on their own, so when they come together, they only complement one another. Harley and Ivy have this really human experience and connection. Sure, one likes to smash things with a bat and the other has super plant abilities, but falling in love and wanting to find that, sometimes literal, partner in crime is an extremely relatable feeling. I think this couple has just as much fun robbing Cobblepot together as they do watching movies on the couch in their pajamas, which is the empathetic component of their relationship. Ivy knows that despite Harley's tendency for chaos, disorder and unpredictability, she's incredibly capable and worth far more than how the Joker treats her. I mean, she's a magnificent gymnast who gained a PhD in the fields of psychology. Ivy recognises these strengths amongst other things, allowing Harley to frequently stay in her lairs and co-work together in heists. Sure, they might fight and have disagreements like any friends do, but they always come back to one another, building a relationship that deepens over time, forming a bond that sees Ivy opening up to more people through Harley's influence. And it's because Harley is the first person who reached out to her with no ill intent.
Okay, she made her choice. Let's go.
I'm going with Harley.
Of course you are. She's your only friend.
That's true, but that's by design because she's the only human being I think is worth a shit.
Harley and Quinzel reached out to a hurting soul, someone who secluded themselves away and didn't trivialize worrying about emotions. It's no surprise that a character like Harley Quinn, a woman with so much love to give, would be the first person to help Ivy give humanity a chance.
Harleen Quinzel was the only doctor who ever got through to me.
And that's the thing about Harley and Ivy's dynamic. Both have had unforgiving experiences with love, or at least what they considered to be love. That learning to love again is a timely process. It requires time to heal before deep diving back into the unknown, of which, only naturally, they experience through another. During season 2 of the Harley Quinn series, the struggles of self-identity caused from leaving the Joker was no longer Harley's conundrum. Instead, viewers watch a season's worth of commentary displaying the ultimate question: what does Harley want? After you've claimed individuality from a soul-sucking clown, formed a somewhat successful team and achieved everything you've strived for, what's next? What is the end goal for the famous Harley Quinn? And like a hammer to the face, it hits her. It's not what, but who. Coming to the obvious realization that the answer had been staring at her the whole time, being there any time she required help or needed support with every Joker-related injury, and when she was desperate for a place to stay. You would think it ironic, Harley falling in love with a woman once regarded as having no humanity at all. Yet, this couldn't be further from the truth. Ivy has shown affection for the natural blonde multiple times over, and affection is something out of Ivy's jurisdiction. Love isn't an option, shouldn't be an option, but the heart clings to what it desires, thus leading to the terrifying confrontation of loving someone unconditionally. Because Harley is a living conflict. She's loud, chaotic, impulsive, and a large collection of adjectives that scare Poison Ivy. Compared to Harley, plants are dependable, they listen, and have an understanding and awareness of personal space. The conflict of loving Harley is deeply rooted in raw emotional antipathy, perpetually loving someone obsessed with a shitty human being and whose personality is almost paradoxical to Ivy's own. It's why she decides on dating Kite Man, because he's safe, an easy route for what would otherwise be a chaotic mess with Harley. But that chaoticness is part of the package with Harley. She's the one thing in Ivy's life, with the exception of plants, that is actually worth something. Yes, Harley might be all the adjectives listed before, but they're also the reasons to love her too. There are some unconvinced that Harley and Ivy's relationship evolution shouldn't include romantic love, depicting this turn in both their arcs to be forced and nonsensical from what their relationship started as. However, the themes of love have been sprinkled throughout the entire journey of their dynamic. Love is shown in the way they continuously save each other, never leaving or abandoning like others in their past. Love is in the abundance of photos they share together, in nearly every comic they appear in. Photos recollecting moments of the joy and thrill of committing crime with a best friend. Love is wearing stupid shirts and memorabilia comfortably around another whilst putting up with contagious stupidity.
Ive?
Yes?
No, I wouldn't say your name. I was saying Ive, as in I've got a plan.
A plan that would find its way into the brains of Justin Halpern, Patrick Schumacher, and Dean Lowry. The word love has been used frequently between Harley and Ivy in canon, and for the HBO Max show, these executive producers had explicitly pre-planned the romantic route of Harley and Ivy's relationship right from the beginning. It wasn't a decision randomly fabricated, but from seizing an opportunity in developing from the seeds that had been sown from the episode Harley and Ivy, to the years of progression that had filtered its way through comic pages. In fact, the first canon mention of the word love between Harley and Ivy, in the context of solidifying the beginnings of many fans' intuitions, was written by Paul Dini, aka the co-creator of Harley Quinn. Pushing their relationship to the next level was merely a natural progression, confirming ideations that were tiptoed around in the 2009 comic Gotham City Sirens. This decision enabled multiple writers to expand on Poison Ivy's character specifically, opening a profusion of opportunity to showcase a new scope into her personality and subconscious. In what was before considered the apotheosis of her character, hating humanity and threatening to never love again, it's heartwarming as a fan to see her character grow, to open up to more people, and to actually love again. Because facetiously enough, despite being pretty dysfunctional beings, having killed a few people here or there, what their relationship inspires is hope. Seeing two women face through the struggles and battles of abuse like so many in real life is perhaps more relatable to some than the heroic relationships that are constantly pushed in comics. Moving on from a toxic part of your life is difficult. It comes with many hardships and sometimes relapses. And that's why all those small affectionate touches, so harshly juxtaposed to the cruelness of their abusers, is an inspiration that people needed from comic books. Heroism not shown for the stereotypical protection of a caped crusader, but through the start of a healing process that still requires just as much strength and courage as any superhero with a logo on their chest. Unlike the relationship of Joker and Harley's, there is an authentic and realistic expectation of an endgame for Harley and Ivy. It's a relationship more imaginable and logical for the long term, because the struggles in the relationship aren't built on abuse, but anxiety in moving forward, a realistic and stupidly humane struggle that so many viewers can relate to. And maybe it's because of all these points I've stated that DC has started opening up to the romantic side of their relationship. As the years go by, their relationship is further solidified within DC canon, their touches being less questionable and more functional, an unintentional slow burn that DC is finally allowing without pushback.
I think in the context of their relationship and portraying a queer relationship, there was no pushback whatsoever.
And why would they, when they have been given a relationship that has developed so gradually and naturally over years of history, is a brighter step forward from the abuse of Harley and Ivy's characters, and is loved by so many fans. As always, thank you for watching. I'd love to thank everyone who has been supporting me on Patreon. You guys have been so helpful to me in this channel, and we're getting exceedingly close to my Chainsaw Man analysis video goal. So if you fancy being a helping hand towards that goal, I'll put my Patreon link in the description. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.